The morning sun rose over Kepler 442c, just like it had for thousands of years, but Dr. Hannah Kim knew this would be one of the last times anyone would see it. She walked quickly through the crystal corridors of the Zelathi capital, her boots clicking against the smooth floors that seemed to glow with their own inner light. The Zelathi had built their cities to work with nature, not against it, and everything around her looked like it grew from the ground itself rather than being constructed. But today, all that beauty felt fragile. Hannah clutched the datapad in, her hands the numbers on it spelling doom for an entire world. She had run the calculations dozens of times, hoping to find an error, but the results never changed. The star that had given life to this world for millions of years was about to destroy it. The High Assembly Chamber was unlike anything humans had back on Earth. Instead of rows of seats, the Zelathi gathered in a natural amphitheater carved from living rock. Hundreds of tall, elegant beings filled the space, their silver skin catching the light and making the whole room shimmer. They moved with a grace that made Hannah feel clumsy, their forearms flowing like dancers, even when they were just walking. Elder Thalmoran stood at the center, his ancient face marked with worry lines that seemed deeper today. The Zelathi lived for centuries, and he had seen many crises, but nothing like this. When he spoke, his voice had a musical quality that the translation device in Hannah's ear turned into flat, human words. Dr. Kim brings us news from the Stellar Observatory, he announced, and the chamber fell silent. Even the youngest Zelathi children seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. Hannah stepped forward, her heart pounding. She had delivered bad news before, but never to an entire civilization. "The data is clear," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "Your star is collapsing faster than any model predicted. The fusion core is destabilizing, and when it goes, it will take everything in this system with it." A wave of sounds swept through the assembly, not quite gasps, but something like wind through crystal chimes. The Zelathi communicated as much through harmonics as words, and the chamber filled with notes of fear and disbelief. "How long?" asked Elder Kesithara, her 4 hands pressed together in what Hannah had learned was a gesture of deep concern. 8 months, Hannah replied. "Maybe 6 if the collapse accelerates." The silence that followed was deafening. These people had built their entire civilization around agriculture and harmony with nature. Their ships were designed for short trips to nearby moons to trade goods, not for escaping their solar system. The largest vessel in their fleet could carry maybe 1,000 people, and that was pushing it. Elder Thalmoran's voice cracked when he spoke. 2,300,000,000 Zelathi call this world home. Our children, our elders, our artists and farmers. How can we possibly save them all? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Hannah had no answer. Even with human technology, evacuating that many people would be nearly impossible, and the Zelathi were centuries behind humanity in space travel. That night, as Hannah stood on her apartment balcony watching the Zelathi moons rise, she heard the first distress signal go out. The quantum transmitters sent the message racing across space faster than light, carrying a simple plea to every civilization in the galaxy. Message was brief but heartbreaking. "This is the Zelathi Republic of Kepler 442c. Our star is dying. Our world will end in 8 months. We have 2 billion souls and no way to save them. Please, if anyone can hear this, we need help. We are dying. Our world ends soon. Help us." As the signal spread across the galaxy, Hannah wondered if anyone would answer. The universe was vast and often cruel, and civilizations rarely helped each other without expecting something in return. But somewhere out there, in a small monitoring station on the edge of human space, someone was listening. Admiral Jin Wu had been stationed at Outpost Meridian for 3 years, and he thought he had seen everything the galaxy could throw at him. The remote monitoring station sat on the very edge of human space, a tiny metal dot surrounded by endless darkness. Most days, nothing happened. They tracked asteroid movements, monitored space traffic, and sent routine reports back to Earth. It was quiet work, the kind that made some officers go crazy from boredom. But today was different. The Zelathi distress signal had reached them 12 hours ago, And since then, Jinwoo had been glued to his communication console, watching the galaxy's response unfold. What he saw made his stomach turn. The first reply came from the Vorthak. Empire, those brutal warrior kings who had conquered half a dozen star systems through pure violence. Their message was short and cold. Weakness deserves extinction. The strong survive, the weak perish. This is natural law. Jinwoo had dealt with the Vorthak before. They saw kindness as a disease and compassion as stupidity. Next came the ethereal collective, beings of pure energy who claimed to have evolved beyond physical needs. Their response arrived as a complex, mathematical equation that his computer translated into simple terms. The rescue mission would cost more resources than the Zelati were worth. They had calculated the value of 2 billion lives and found it lacking. To them, everything was just numbers on a spreadsheet. The ancient cosmic tribunal took longer to respond, but their answer was just as disappointing. These elder beings had supposedly been keeping peace in the galaxy for thousands of years, but their message was brutally simple. Beyond our mandate, we do not interfere in natural stellar phenomena. They hid behind rules and regulations while an entire world died. Jinwoo watched response after response flood in. The Silicon Brotherhood said they were too busy with internal upgrades. The Hive Queens claimed their resources were allocated elsewhere. The Crystal Confederacy stated it was not strategically advantageous. Every major power in the galaxy found a reason to say no. Lieutenant Dahi Park sat at the communication station, her face growing paler with each rejection. She was young, barely 25, and this was her first assignment outside the solar system. "Sir," she said quietly, "the Nexus Alliance just responded. They say the Zelathi failed to plan adequately for stellar evolution." Her voice shook with anger. "They're blaming them for their star dying." Jinwoo stood up and walked to the main display screen. It showed a map of the local galaxy with Kepler 4442c marked as a small red dot in the distance. The numbers were staggering. It would take months to reach them, assuming they could even mount a rescue mission. The radiation from the dying star would kill most species within hours. The logistics alone were nightmare fuel. "Sir," Dahi continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "we're just a monitoring post. We have one small patrol ship and a crew of 30. What could we possibly do against something this big?" Jinwoo stared at that red dot for a long moment. Around him, his crew waited in silence. These were good people, engineers, scientists, communications specialists. None of them were warriors or heroes, just regular humans doing their jobs, at the edge of space. But they were all thinking the same thing he was. The silence stretched on until communications specialist Young Min spoke up from his corner station. "Admiral, the last response just came in. The Galactic Trade Federation says helping the Zelathi would set a dangerous precedent for fiscal responsibility." That did it. Jinwoo felt something snap inside him. Here was an entire civilization crying out for help, and the galaxy's response was to count coins and quote regulations. He had joined the space service to explore and protect, not to watch good people die while bureaucrats made excuses. He walked over to the quantum transmitter, the most powerful communication device on the station. His crew watched him with growing understanding. They knew what he was about to do, and they knew it would change everything. "This is Admiral Jin, Wu of the Terran Federation," he said into the transmitter, his voice carrying across the vast distances of space. "We hear you, Zelathi. We're coming." The words hung in the air of the small command center. 30 humans, sitting in a tiny outpost, at the edge of nowhere, had just promised to save 2 billion lives. It was impossible. It was crazy, and it was probably going to get them all killed. But it was also the most human thing they could do. The news of humanity's promise spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Within hours of Admiral Jinwoo's transmission, every major civilization knew that the humans, those newcomers who had barely learned to travel between stars, had just committed to the largest rescue operation in galactic history. Ambassador Yuki Sato knew she was walking into a storm when she entered the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council on Nexus Prime. The massive hall could hold representatives from 1,000 worlds, but today it felt more like a courtroom. Ancient beings who had ruled, Space for millennia sat in judgment, and she was about to become their entertainment. The Hive Queen spoke first, her insect-like form clicking and chittering as she leaned forward. Her compound eyes reflected the chamber's lights like 1,000 tiny mirrors. "Humans," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who controlled entire star systems. "Your biggest ships can barely carry 50,000 people. The Zelathi have over 2 billion souls on that dying world. Can you even count that high?" Cruel laughter rippled through the chamber, sounds that made Yuki's teeth ache. Some of these beings communicated in frequencies that human ears weren't designed to hear, and their amusement felt like needles in her brain. The Nexar representative spoke next, its crystalline body chiming like wind through broken glass. "Your species has been traveling between stars for what, 90 years? 100 at most?" The crystal being's form shifted colors, showing its contempt. "We have been masters of space since before your son was born. This rescue requires technology you cannot even imagine." Yuki felt small standing among these ancient powers. The ethereal collective floated nearby, beings of pure energy who claimed to have transcended physical form centuries ago, the Vorthak. War Chancellor sat like a mountain of scars and muscle, his battle-worn hide telling the story of 1,000 conquered worlds. These were civilizations that had shaped the galaxy, while humans were still learning to make fire. But she held her ground. "We may be young," she said, her voice steady despite the overwhelming presence around her, "but we don't abandon people who need help. That's not who we are." The War Chancellor's laugh was like rocks grinding together. "Sentiment," he growled, his massive form leaning forward. "You will fail, and fail completely. The galaxy will watch your ships burn in the radiation of that dying star, and perhaps then you will learn your place among the real powers." A chorus of agreement rose from the assembled aliens. They had already calculated the odds, run the numbers, analyzed every possible approach. The math was simple. Impossible plus impossible still equals impossible. Back on Earth, President Kyung-min sat in the emergency session room deep beneath the capital. The World Council had been in continuous session since Jin Woo's transmission, and the reports from Ambassador Sato weren't making anyone feel better about their decision. "Sir," said Defense Secretary Gina Lee, her fingers dancing across holographic displays filled with numbers that all seemed to end in zeros, "the logistics are nightmare fuel. Our biggest colony ships can handle maybe 60,000 people in emergency conditions. We'd need 40,000 ships just to carry them all, and we don't have 40,000 ships total in our entire fleet." Secretary of Space Development Han Kuehl looked just as grim. "The distance alone is crushing us. It would take our fastest ships 8 months to reach Kepler 442c, and that's assuming they don't break down along the way. By the time we get there, their star might already be gone." President Kyung-min listened to the reports in silence. Around the table, his advisors painted picture after picture of certain failure. The radiation levels would kill human crews within hours. The Zelathi had no space infrastructure to support a massive evacuation. Earth's entire space fleet was designed for exploration and colonization, not emergency rescue operations. Transport Minister So Young pulled up another display. "Sir, even if we stripped every ship we have and converted them for maximum passenger capacity, we're looking at maybe 2 million evacuees. That leaves over 2 billion people with no way off that world." The room fell silent. These were smart people, the best minds humanity had to offer, and they were all telling him the same thing. It couldn't be done. Kyung-min stood up and walked to the large window that showed Earth turning slowly beneath them. Somewhere out there, beyond the blue sky and the scattered clouds, Admiral Jin Woo was probably already planning the impossible. The man had committed humanity to a promise that might destroy them, but backing down now would destroy something else, something that made them human in the first place. "For they think we can't do it," he said quietly, still looking out at Earth. "Every major power in the galaxy thinks we're about to fail spectacularly." Defense Secretary Gina Lee nodded grimly. "Maybe they're right, sir. The numbers really are impossible." Kyung-min turned back to his advisors with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good. We've never been very good at accepting impossible anyway." He activated the global communication system that would carry his words to every human colony in space. Then we'll make the impossible possible. Chief Engineer Bin Su had worked on some crazy projects in his 30 years of shipbuilding, but nothing like this. Shipyard Olympus stretched for kilometers in every direction, a massive construction facility floating in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Usually it hummed with the quiet efficiency of routine maintenance and new ship construction. Today it looked like a war zone. Hundreds of ships floated in the zero-gravity workspace, but they weren't being built. They were being torn apart and put back together in ways that would make their original designers weep. Cargo haulers that normally carried grain and metals were having their holds ripped out and replaced with life support systems. Luxury passenger liners were losing their restaurants and entertainment decks to make room for more people. Even old military ships that had been mothballed for decades were being dragged out of retirement. "Strip everything that doesn't keep people alive or make the ship move," Bin Su shouted over the sound of cutting torches and welding equipment. His engineering teams worked around the clock, fueled by coffee and the kind of determination that only comes when the clock is ticking toward disaster. The Merchant's Dream, a cargo hauler that normally carried supplies to the outer colonies, was barely recognizable. Where its cargo bays used to be, workers were installing row after row of hibernation pods. The ship's beautiful observation deck had been replaced with additional life support processors. Even the captain's quarters were being converted into emergency medical facilities. "Sir," called out Engineer Min Ho, floating over with a tablet, full of calculations, "the Seoul Express is ready for testing. We've tripled her passenger capacity, but I'm not sure the power systems can handle the load." Bin Su pushed off from a nearby wall and floated over to examine the modified passenger liner. The Seoul Express had been designed to carry wealthy tourists on luxury cruises between Earth and the outer planets. Now it looked like a floating apartment building, every available space packed with hibernation pods and life support equipment. Meanwhile, in Laboratory Section 7, Dr. Rin Choi was having the best week of her career. The impossible deadline had forced her team to think in ways they never had before. Traditional hibernation systems took months to build and install, but they needed something that could be mass-produced in days. "The key is modularity," she explained to her exhausted but excited team. "Instead of custom building each system, we create standard pods that can plug into any ship's power and life support grid, like building blocks, but for keeping people alive in space." Her breakthrough came at 3 in the morning after her 14th cup of coffee. Instead of the bulky hibernation chambers used in normal space travel, she designed compact pods that were barely larger than a coffin, but could keep a person safely unconscious for months. Better yet, they could be manufactured using the same automated systems that built everything from smartphones to Starship engines. The second breakthrough was even better: expandable hull sections. Using a combination of smart materials and engineering tricks borrowed from military vessels, they could literally make ships bigger. A transport that normally carried 10,000 people could suddenly handle 25,000. Across human space, the response was unlike anything in their short history as a spacefaring species. The mining colonies around Tau Ceti, normally fierce competitors who fought over asteroid claims, donated their entire transport fleet without being asked. These were tough, practical ships designed to haul raw materials across vast distances, perfect for the mission ahead. The agricultural worlds around Kepler 186 did something even more dramatic. They stripped their massive grain haulers, ships, the size of city blocks that normally carried food to hungry colonies. These vessels had enormous cargo holds and powerful engines, exactly what the rescue fleet needed. Most surprising of all, the notorious pirates of the Vega system showed up at the rallying point with a dozen fast attack ships. Captain Lee Sung, their leader, transmitted a simple message: "We may be criminals, but we're not monsters. These ships are yours." Captain Soon Ho stood on the bridge of the Determination, a converted military command ship that would coordinate the entire operation. Around him, holographic displays showed the growing fleet as more ships arrived every hour. It was the strangest armada anyone had ever seen. Cargo haulers flying alongside luxury yachts, pirate ships next to scientific research vessels, all united by a single impossible goal: Operation Stellar Lifeline is officially a go, he announced to the assembled fleet commanders. We have 200 ships, space for 40 million people, and about 6 months to pull off the biggest rescue in galactic history. The fleet that finally departed human space looked nothing like the sleek, elegant vessels of the advanced alien civilizations. It was a patchwork collection of modified ships held together with human engineering, determination, and hope. Some critics called it the ugliest fleet ever assembled, but to Captain Sun Ho, it was the most beautiful sight in the universe. As they jumped to hyperspace, heading toward a dying star and 2 billion people who needed their help, every human in the fleet knew they were attempting the impossible. But that had never stopped them before. The Kepler 442 system had become a nightmare of fire and radiation. Captain Min Ki stood on the bridge of the New Seoul, watching the main display screen show readings that should have been impossible. The star that had peacefully warmed the Zalathi world for millions of years was now throwing off solar flares the size of planets. "Captain," called his navigation officer, Seung Woo, his voice tight with worry, "that last flare registered 10 times normal intensity. The radiation is cooking everything in the inner system." Min Ki checked the dosimeter clipped to his uniform. The small device was already showing yellow warnings, and they hadn't even started the real work yet. Around him, his crew moved with the kind of calm efficiency that comes from knowing you're probably going to die but having a job to do anyway. The New Seoul had been a grain hauler just 6 months ago, carrying rice and wheat between Earth's agricultural colonies. Now it was packed with 40,000 hibernation pods and life support systems that hummed and clicked constantly. The ship's hull had been reinforced with radiation shielding, but Min Ki knew it wouldn't be enough. Nothing could really protect them from what that dying star was throwing at them. "Sir," reported Engineer Dong Hyun from the engine room, "the radiation is starting to interfere with our electronics. I'm having to manually reset systems every few minutes." Min Ki nodded grimly. "Keep us flying, Dong Hyun, that's all we need." Down on the planet's surface, the situation was even worse. Evacuation Coordinator Yu Na had set up her command center in what used to be the Zalathi capital's beautiful central plaza. The graceful crystal spires that had once caught sunlight and turned it into rainbows were now dark and empty. The Zalathi had fled to the evacuation centers, leaving behind a city that looked like a ghost town. Yu Na wore a radiation suit that felt like a portable oven. The cooling systems worked over time, but she was still sweating constantly. Around her, teams of human volunteers worked to process 2 billion Zalathi civilians for evacuation, checking their health, assigning them to ships, and getting them to the orbital transfer stations. "Ma'am," reported her second-in-command, Jae Min, his voice crackling through the radio, "the outer cities are in bad shape. The solar winds are literally stripping away their atmosphere. We've got maybe 3 days before those areas become completely uninhabitable." Yu Na looked at the tactical display showing Zalathi settlements scattered across the planet. Each dot represented thousands of people who needed to be saved, and time was running out faster than anyone had predicted. The star's collapse was accelerating, and the radiation levels were climbing every hour. "Then we work faster," she said simply, watching another human shuttle launch from the surface. The pilot was flying straight into a radiation storm that would probably kill him within hours. But he was doing it anyway because there were Zalathi families waiting for rescue in a distant settlement. The first wave of evacuation ships had arrived 3 days ago, and the loading process had begun immediately. It was like trying to empty an ocean with a bucket. The Zalathi were graceful, patient people who moved in orderly lines toward the transport shuttles, but there were just so many of them. Captain Hai Won's voice crackled over the communication channels from the Busan Pride, a converted passenger liner that was approaching loading dock 7 through a particularly nasty radiation storm. "Beginning final approach," she announced, her voice steady even though her ship's radiation alarms were screaming warnings. "Radiation's not that bad if you don't think about it." Yu Na almost smiled at that. Humans had developed a dark sense of humor about impossible situations. The radiation levels around Kepler 442c would kill most alien species within hours, but humans had always been good at adapting to hostile environments. They were tough, stubborn creatures who refused to die easily. The evacuation centers were marvels of organized chaos. Zelathi families waited in long lines while human medics checked them for radiation exposure and fitted them with protective gear for the journey to orbit. The Zelathi children were especially heartbreaking, their large, curious eyes watching the humans who had come to save them with a mixture of hope and fear. Shuttle Bay 7 is ready for departure, reported Transport Chief Kyung-soo. We've got 800 Zelathi aboard, all secured in emergency pods. Yuna watched the shuttle lift off through her helmet's radiation-shielded visor. It was one of dozens launching every hour, carrying precious cargo to the evacuation ships waiting. In orbit, each successful launch felt like a small victory against the dying star that was trying to kill them all. But even as they worked, everyone knew the terrible truth. They were racing against time they didn't have. The star's collapse was accelerating, faster than their models predicted, and the radiation storms were getting worse every day. Some of the human crews were already showing signs of radiation sickness, but none of them asked to be relieved. In the distance, another massive solar flare erupted from the dying star, lighting up the darkening sky with deadly beauty. Yuna counted the seconds until the radiation wave would hit them, then got back to work. There were still nearly 2 billion people to save. The evacuation had turned into something that defied every rule of space travel and common sense. Captain Kai gripped the command chair of the Iron Mountain as his ship shuddered through another brutal radiation storm. The vessel had started life as a simple asteroid mining ship, designed to haul rocks and metal ore in the quiet darkness between planets. Now it was carrying 37,000 Zelathi refugees, packed into every available space like sardines. "Captain?" "Engineer." Sorin called out, her voice strained as she monitored the ship's vital systems. "We're running at 300% of recommended capacity. The life support processors are working so hard, they're literally vibrating the deck plates. I don't know how much longer we can push this." Kai Young looked through the main viewport at the orbital transfer station, where another crowd of Zelathi families waited patiently for rescue. These tall, graceful beings stood in orderly lines, despite the chaos around them, their silver skin reflecting the angry red light from their dying star. Many held children in their forearms, and Kai Young could see the trust in their large dark eyes. "Then we'll make room," he said simply. "Strip everything from the officers' quarters. We'll sleep in shifts in the corridors if we have to." This scene was playing out across the entire rescue fleet. The New Dawn, a luxury cruise ship that once carried wealthy tourists to scenic nebulae, now housed 60,000 refugees in spaces where 5,000 had once seemed crowded. The crew had given up their personal cabins, their recreation areas, even their dining halls. They slept on the floor and ate emergency rations so their passengers could survive. Captain Hai Jin of the converted cargo hauler Seoul Express hadn't slept in her own bed for 3 weeks. Her quarters now housed a Zelathi family with 6 children, and she caught naps in the ship's maintenance tunnels between shifts. "It's not about comfort anymore," she told her exhausted crew. "It's about how many lives we can save." The human crews were pushing themselves beyond any reasonable limit. They worked 18-hour shifts in radiation that would kill most species, survived on caffeine and determination, and somehow kept smiling when Zelathi children looked up at them with wonder. Food rations were cut in half, then cut again, so there would be enough for the refugees. But the worst moment came when the Frontier Hope took a direct hit from a massive solar flare. Captain Chang Wook watched his main reactor shut down, leaving his ship dead in space with 15,000 Zelathi passengers aboard. The life support systems had maybe 6 hours of battery power left. "All ships, this is Frontier Hope," Chang Wook transmitted calmly, even as sparks flew from damaged consoles around him. "We've lost main power. Beginning passenger transfer. Operations." What happened next would be talked about for generations. Instead of abandoning ship, Chang Wook and his entire crew stayed behind to manually operate the life support systems. They took turns cranking the air recyclers by hand, manually adjusting the temperature controls, and keeping the lights on through pure human stubbornness while other ships moved in to rescue their passengers. Engineer Tae Hyun collapsed from exhaustion after 8 hours of hand-cranking the water recyclers. Medical Officer Su Young worked herself to the point of radiation poisoning, keeping the environmental systems running. They saved every single Zalathi passenger, but Chang Wook and 12 of his crew members died from radiation exposure before the evacuation was complete. Dr. Mei Ri had turned the fleet's medical facilities into something resembling a battlefield hospital. She moved from ship to ship, treating radiation sickness in both humans and Zalathi, working with equipment that was never designed for the scale of this crisis. Her medical team had been exposed to dangerous radiation levels for months, but when she suggested rotating them out, they all refused. "Those people down there are dying," said nurse practitioner Yeon Su, her hands shaking from radiation sickness as she prepared another dose of anti-radiation medication. "We're the only thing standing between them and death. We stay." Elder Kethnala, one of the Zalathi spiritual leaders, watched human medics working to save Zalathi children who had been exposed to too much radiation during the surface evacuation. The humans moved with gentle efficiency, using their own precious medical supplies and risking their health to treat patients from an alien species they had barely known existed a year ago. "The humans are killing themselves for us," he whispered to his aide, his forearms trembling with emotion. "They give us their food, their beds, their medicine, their very lives. Why would they do this for strangers?" His aide, a younger Zalathi, named Velnara, watched a human doctor collapse from exhaustion after working for 20 straight hours. Other humans immediately carried him to a rest area, gave him a stimulant injection, and he was back on his feet within an hour. "I don't think they see us as strangers," Velnara replied quietly. "I think they see us as family." In the distance, the observation vessels of other galactic civilizations maintained their safe positions, far from the radiation and chaos. They recorded everything with advanced sensors, documenting what they expected to be humanity's spectacular failure. The Vorthak battlecruiser, Domination, hung in space like a metal shark, its crew placing bets on how many human ships would be destroyed. But the humans kept working, kept pushing, kept saving lives against impossible odds. They had turned the evacuation into something that defied logic and physics, powered by nothing more than stubborn refusal to give up on people who needed help. The Rising Phoenix had been a beautiful ship once, a luxury passenger liner that carried wealthy tourists on scenic tours of distant nebulae. Captain Jun-sik had commanded her for 8 years, taking pride in her gleaming corridors and elegant observation decks. Now she was packed with 20,000 Zalathi refugees, her beautiful interior stripped away and replaced with life support systems and hibernation pods. The solar storm hit without warning. One moment, they were making steady progress toward the evacuation rendezvous point, and the next moment the ship was being battered by radiation levels that turned their instruments into screaming alarms. Jun-sik felt the deck shudder beneath his feet as the storm's electromagnetic pulse tore through their electronics. "Captain," shouted Engineer Wu Jin from his station, "we've lost the main power coupling. Life support is failing across the entire ship." Jun-sik's blood ran cold. 20,000 Zalathi passengers were depending on those life support systems to keep them alive. Without power, they would suffocate within minutes. The ship's backup batteries could keep emergency systems running, but not for long, and definitely not with this many people aboard. First Officer Yon Wu ran diagnostics on his console, his face growing pale as the readings came in. "Sir, we can't repair the damage from here. The storm fried our primary systems completely." He paused, his hands shaking slightly. "But the escape pods are still functional. We can evacuate the crew." Jun-sik stared at the tactical display showing their situation. The Rising Phoenix was dying, her hull cracking under the stress of the solar storm. Standard procedure was clear: save the crew first, then worry about passengers. But there were 15 humans aboard and 20,000 Zalathi refugees who had trusted them with their lives. He walked to the nearest passenger compartment and looked through the reinforced window. Zalathi families huddled together in the cramped space, their children clinging to their parents with all four arms. Their large, dark eyes looked up at him with complete trust. They believed the humans would save them, just like they had promised. "Abandon." "Ship order, sir." Yonwoo asked quietly, his finger hovering over the emergency evacuation button. Jun-sik thought about his wife back on Earth, about the retirement home they had planned to buy on the coast of Korea. He thought about the crew, members who had families waiting for them, young people with their whole lives ahead of them. Then he looked at those Zalathi children again, and his decision became clear. Negative, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. All power to passenger life support. Signal the other ships for immediate evacuation assistance. We stay with our passengers. The crew didn't argue. Engineer Wu Jin rerouted every available amp of power to the life support systems keeping their passengers alive. Communications Officer Da Bin sent out distress calls to every ship in the rescue fleet. Medical Officer Hai Won moved through the passenger compartments, checking on the Zalathi families and trying to keep them calm. The Rising Phoenix held together for another 2 hours, her hull groaning and cracking as the solar storm tore her apart, piece by piece. Other ships from the rescue fleet arrived as quickly as they could, their own crews risking destruction to save the refugees. The Soul Bright, a converted cargo hauler, pulled alongside and began emergency transfer operations. Captain Min Soo watched through his bridge windows as the Rising Phoenix literally came apart, her hull plates peeling away like flower petals in a hurricane. "Transfer complete," reported the Soul Bright's rescue coordinator. "All 20,000 passengers are aboard and secure." But it was too late for Jun-sik and his crew. The Rising Phoenix broke apart completely. Her final transmission, AAE. Simple message. All passengers safe, mission accomplished. This scene played out 17 times during the final months of the evacuation. Each time, human crews faced the same impossible choice, and each time they chose to save their passengers rather than themselves. The converted mining ship, Iron, Will stayed with her passengers when her engines failed. The luxury yacht Ocean Dream refused to abandon her refugees when pirates attacked. The cargo hauler, New Frontier, gave her life to save 30,000 Zalathi when a solar flare crippled her systems. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. Advanced civilizations with thousands of years of spacefaring experience had calculated that the evacuation was impossible. But these supposedly primitive humans were actually doing it. More shocking still, they were dying to make it happen. Elder Thesamora was among the last Zalathi to leave their dying world. He was old even by Zalathi standards, having lived through 8 centuries of his people's peaceful existence. He had seen the rise and fall of galactic empires, watched civilizations come and go, but he had never seen anything like what the humans were doing. Captain Bo Ram of the transport ship, Morning Star, helped him into his hibernation pod with gentle, practiced movements. Her hands were scarred from radiation burns, and she moved with the careful precision of someone who had been exposed to too much cosmic radiation. But her touch was gentle as she adjusted the pod's life support settings. "Why?" the old Zalathi asked, his 4 hands grasping hers with surprising strength. "Why do you die for people you barely know? We are strangers to you. Different species, different worlds, different lives. Why sacrifice everything for us?" Boram smiled, and despite her exhaustion and the radiation sickness that was slowly killing her, there was genuine warmth in her expression. She had lost friends, shipmates, people she cared about during this mission. She would probably never see Earth again, never hold her own children, never grow old in the peaceful retirement she had planned. "Because someone has to care," she said simply, sealing the hibernation pod that would keep him safe for the long journey to their new home. "And we decided it would be us." The journey to New Haven began as a desperate exodus from a dying world, but it became something completely unexpected. 2 billion Zalathi refugees and their human rescuers were crammed into ships never designed for such numbers, traveling through the dark void between stars for 8 long months. What should have been a nightmare of overcrowding and desperation turned into one of the most remarkable cultural exchanges in galactic history. Food production engineer Sang Mi had thought she knew everything about growing crops in space. She had spent 15 years designing hydroponic systems for human colonies, creating ways to feed millions of people using recycled water and artificial soil. But when she met Elder Vorthagen in the converted cargo hold of the New Dawn, she realized she had barely scratched the surface of what was possible. The old Zalathi scientist moved through the cramped, growing bay with the grace of someone who had spent centuries working with living plants. His forearms moved independently, checking soil samples, adjusting nutrient levels, and somehow making tiny seedlings grow in conditions that should have killed them within hours. "Your hydroponic systems are very efficient," Vorthagen said, in his musical voice, his large eyes studying the human-designed equipment. "But they treat plants like machines that need fuel. Our approach is different." Sang Mi watched in amazement as he mixed what looked like ordinary shipboard compost with some kind of Zalathi bioculture. Within minutes, the mixture began to glow with a soft, organic light. When he planted earth tomatoes in the enhanced soil, they didn't just grow, they thrived, producing fruit twice the normal size. "Your plants speak to the earth," Sang Mi marveled, taking notes as fast as she could write. The implications were staggering. If they could combine human engineering efficiency with Zalathi bioadaptive techniques, they could revolutionize food production across the galaxy. "And your people speak to the impossible," Vorthagen replied, with something that might have been a Zalathi smile. He gestured at the jury-rigged life support systems humming around them. "You took ships meant for cargo and made them into arcs. You saved 2 billion souls with technology held together by determination and prayer." The cultural exchange wasn't limited to the scientists and engineers. In the passenger compartments, Zalathi harmony singers began teaching human children their unique form of mathematics. The Zalathi didn't just use numbers, they sang them, creating mathematical equations that were also beautiful melodies. 8-year-old Hyejin Park sat cross-legged on the deck, surrounded by young Zalathi, who towered over her even when sitting. Their teacher, a Zalathi named Kesevila, demonstrated how to calculate orbital mechanics by humming a complex harmony that somehow made the numbers dance in her mind. "Mathematics is the language of the universe," Kesevila explained, her voice creating notes that human ears could barely detect. "But music is its soul. When you combine them, you can understand things that pure logic cannot reach." The human children picked up the harmony math faster than anyone expected. Soon, cargo bays echoed with the sound of mixed-species children singing solutions to engineering problems, their voices creating beautiful music that also happened to be brilliant science. Human storytellers found equally eager audiences among the Zalathi refugees. Captain Bo Kyung of the transport, Sol Star, had been telling stories since he was old enough to talk, and he discovered that the Zalathi loved Earth's tales of struggle and triumph. "Tell us again about the Great Wall," requested Elder Nethmara. Settling down with a group of Zalathi families in what used to be the ship's dining hall, how humans built it stone by stone across impossible distances. Bo Kyung's stories became legendary among the refugees. He told them about humanity's long journey from caves to stars, about wars and peace, about failures and victories. The Zalathi listened with fascination to tales of a species that refused to give up, that built wonders through stubborn determination rather than advanced technology. Captain Nari commanded the lead vessel New Dawn, and she received daily reports that amazed her more each day. Human Zalathi teams were creating innovations that neither species had imagined possible. Hybrid farming techniques that could feed more people with less space. Adaptive technologies that learned from biological systems. Most importantly, friendships that transcended the barriers between species. Ship's sociologist Du Hyun spent his days documenting the remarkable transformation taking place in the refugee fleet. It started as a rescue mission, he reported to Captain Nari, but it's become something unprecedented. Humans and Zalathi are working together as if they've been partners for centuries. In the engineering sections, mixed crews solved problems by combining human innovation with Zalathi patience and wisdom. In the medical bays, human doctors learned Zalathi healing techniques, while Zalathi healers studied human surgical procedures. In the recreation areas, children from both species played games that neither could have invented alone. "They're not refugees anymore," Do Hyun continued, watching a group of human and Zalathi teenagers work together to repair a damaged air recycler. They're our partners, our friends, our family. The journey to New Haven was supposed to be an ending, the conclusion of a desperate rescue mission, but as Captain Nari watched humans and Zalathi working side by side, laughing together, learning from each other, she realized it was actually a beginning. They weren't just traveling to a new world, they were creating a new kind of civilization, one built on cooperation rather than competition. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. New Haven had been nothing special when humanity first found it, just another marginal world on the edge of colonized space, barely suitable for human settlement. The atmosphere was thin, the soil was poor, and the weather patterns were unpredictable. Most survey teams had written it off as maybe suitable for mining operations in 50 years. But when 2 billion Zalathi refugees arrived with their human rescuers, everything changed. What the galaxy witnessed over the next 2 years defied every prediction and shattered every assumption about what was possible. The transformation began almost immediately. Zalathi agricultural specialists, working alongside human engineers, didn't just make the barren world habitable, they turned it into something that looked like paradise. Fields of golden grain stretched to the horizon, orchards heavy with fruit dotted the landscape, and gardens bloomed in places where nothing had grown for millions of years. The secret wasn't just Zalathi knowledge or human technology. It was the combination of both. Humans provided the massive terraforming equipment and the stubborn determination to reshape an entire world. The Zalathi brought thousands of years of agricultural wisdom and their unique ability to work with living systems rather than against them. Within 18 months, New Haven was producing more food than worlds that had been farmed for centuries. The surplus was so enormous that they began shipping agricultural products to human colonies across 3 entire sectors. Worlds that had struggled to feed their populations suddenly had abundance, all thanks to the partnership between 2 species, who had started as strangers. Ambassador Wu Jin stood in the same chamber where humanity had been mocked 5 years earlier. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council looked exactly the same, massive columns reaching toward a dome that showed the stars, ancient beings sitting in judgment over the younger races. But this time, the mood was very different. Behind him, holographic displays showed impossible numbers, food production statistics that broke every known model, population growth rates that defied logic, economic indicators that showed a small, supposedly primitive species had become one of the galaxy's major agricultural powers almost overnight. "Impossible," whispered the Nexar representative, its crystalline body flickering with what might have been confusion or fear. "Our calculations showed that the evacuation would fail. Even if it succeeded, the refugees would be a burden for decades." The Hive Queen leaned forward on her throne, her compound eyes reflecting the data streams like 1,000 tiny mirrors. "The humans accomplished what we determined could not be done. 2 billion refugees have become 2 billion productive citizens in less than 2 years. The Vorthak War Chancellor, who had predicted spectacular human failure, sat in brooding silence. His warrior culture understood conquest and domination, but this was something else entirely. Power gained through cooperation rather than conflict. President Tae-hyun's voice carried across the chamber from Earth, transmitted through quantum communicators that linked the worlds. "We didn't do it alone," he said simply. "The Zalathi taught us that some problems can't be solved with just technology or determination. Sometimes you need wisdom, patience, and the willingness to learn from people who see the world differently than you do." The real shock came in the months that followed. Smaller species across the galaxy, races that had been ignored or dismissed by the major powers, began reaching out to humanity. The gentle Keferi, facing catastrophic water shortages on their desert homeworlds, sent desperate pleas for help. The timid Nossel, terrorized by Vorthak raiders who saw them as easy prey, begged for protection. Each plea received the same response that had become humanity's signature. "We hear you. We're coming." The Keferi water crisis was solved using a combination of human desalination technology and Zalathi biofiltration techniques developed on New Haven. The Nossel refugee camps were protected by human security forces who taught the peaceful aliens how to defend themselves without becoming violent. Captain So Young, commanding the relief mission to the Kefri homeworld, watched human engineers and Zelathi biospecialists work together to build water processing plants that seemed to grow from the desert itself. 5 years ago, we were just another minor species struggling to survive, she told her crew. Now we're becoming something the galaxy has never seen, a civilization that gets stronger by helping others. The established galactic powers found themselves facing a completely new situation. For thousands of years, influence had been measured by military might, technological advancement, or economic dominance. But humanity was gaining power through something much simpler and much more dangerous to the old order. They were earning respect and loyalty by actually caring about people who needed help. Elder Thalmoran stood before the United Nations General Assembly on the 5th anniversary of the Kepler 442c evacuation. The Great Hall was packed with representatives from dozens of worlds, not just human colonies, but alien species who had become partners and allies rather than subjects or enemies. "You call yourselves ordinary people," he said, his forearms spread wide in the Zelathi gesture of profound respect. "You say you are nothing special, just humans doing what needs to be done. But you are the first species in galactic history to prove that sometimes being ordinary means being extraordinary." The old Zelathi's voice carried the weight of centuries as he continued. "The great powers of the galaxy have vast fleets and ancient technologies. They can destroy worlds and reshape solar systems. But when 2 billion people cried out for help, only one species answered. Only one species said, 'We will find a way.' In the end, humanity's greatest victory wasn't over alien enemies or impossible odds. It was over the galaxy's deeply held belief that compassion was weakness, that helping others was naive, and that the only way to gain power was to take it from someone else. The humans had proven that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is care about people who can't help themselves. And in doing so, they had become something the galaxy had never seen before, a truly moral force among the stars.